I think it's safe to say that Death Battle is probably my favorite internet show on YouTube. It has everything you want. It has funny banter, it has fun hosts, and it has your favorite characters that you may or may not have grown up with fighting each other to the death in whatever wacky situations that they may have found themselves in. It's fun for the whole family. And like every fan, I have my own list of matchups that I'd like to see get made into episodes. And what better way for people to get to know me than for me to list off 15 different matchups of characters I may or may not have grown up with, be thrown into the gladiatorial fight club of death that is, well, Death Battle. Some of these are popular matchups, some not so much. Some are goofy, some are climactic. This list has it all. Also, a quick side note, this script used to be longer. I originally had made a 25 most wanted matchups list, and then I realized a couple months later that I kind of hated it. A lot of the matchups weren't really stuff I was passionate about, it was just there to fill out the space. So I feel like limiting it down to 15 leaves a lot less room for just filler matchups, because these top 15 are matchups that I actually feel more passionate about than most. Got all that? Good. Let's dive in. Number 15, Nami from One Piece versus Yuffie from Final Fantasy VII. This is a pretty simple one to start off with, and, one that doesn't really have a lot of crazy powers being thrown back and forth. The connections here are pretty solid. Both are thieves who started off stealing from the main group to save their town from some outside force, aka Arlong and the Shinra Corporation. They eventually befriend and join the main group and succeed in taking down said force that's oppressing their town. I like this fight a lot. It's a unique matchup between two underrated characters from franchises I like, and also has a lot of potential for interesting fight scenes and funny gags, since these two characters, their whole joke is that they're greedy and they like money and they like stealing stuff. So, you can build the fight around that. You can have the fight start with both of them trying to steal something, and then, they both get there at the same time, kind of similar to Nathan Drake versus Lara Croft, and then they both start fighting off of that. I want this fight to have interesting back and forths between their abilities, since both Materia and Nami's Climb Attack can both do interesting things, especially with like elemental abilities and stuff. You can have Nami pull out Zeus at some point. You can have Yuffie use her ninja abilities. One thing I do want is that I want Nami to use her illusion move that she does during Water 7, where she does like the, not shadow clones, but like they were basically shadow clone illusions, and have a fun little scene with that. And you can also have some fun melee combat, Climb Attack to Giant Shuriken or whatever Yuffie uses. I'm not really sure who wins this fight. I haven't really done as much research on this fight in particular as other fights in general or even on this list. But if I were to make a shot in the dark, I would imagine Yuffie, because Final Fantasy VII gets a bit crazier in their strength and their power scaling and whatnot. But I would be betting on Nami, because I like Nami. I like One Piece, and Nami's one of the better characters in that show. Now this probably doesn't come as a surprise, but I, like the rest of the Death Battle community, am tired of seeing Marvel vs. DC matchups. They're just kind of constant, and, there's just too many of them, and it just gets kind of boring after a while. There's really only a handful of Marvel vs. DC matchups that I would like to see, and I can't even name all of them off the top of my head. Ant-Man vs. Atom, I think would be one, but the one that made it to this list, and the one that I want to see above all else, is Mysterio vs. Scarecrow. Mysterio vs. Scarecrow is a fun matchup in concept, and it is one that I would like to see maybe next Halloween or sometime next season, because I think this fight has a lot of potential for very fun and trippy imagery, something unlike anything Death Battle has ever seen, except for maybe Madara versus Aizen. The big connection between these two is that they are comic book villains of Batman and Spider-Man, who both fight using illusions or illusion-like gas. This fight, like I said before, has the potential to have some really great, trippy imagery, considering these two characters basically revolve around smokes and mirrors. So you can have some really fun, I don't know exactly what you'd put in the middle of this fight, because I'm not that creative, but I do want to see is a very trippy ending. Madara vs. Aizen gave us a taste of what an ending like this would be, with Aizen getting the upper hand on Madara, seemingly, only to realize that he was under his illusion, his Sharingan. But with characters whose whole thing is casting illusions and creating false doubt, you can have something even better than that. You can have the fake out deaths go on for like 20 whole seconds. Just have them killing each other back and forth. Kind of like Reverse Flash versus Goku Black, with them just killing each other over and over again, but instead of it just being them killing alternate versions of themselves, it's just them seemingly killing the other just for them to realize that they're under that spell right before the winner is eventually revealed in the end. This fight has the potential to be one of the better Marvel vs. DC matchups, besides, just two characters that can punch really hard. This one's a bit different because it's not just who can punch really hard, it's whose illusions are more powerful, who's more cunning, who's smarter. And those are always, I think, the most interesting matchups when it comes to deciding verdicts, because it's different when it's just, oh, he can punch harder. I like the ones where it's a lot closer, and it comes down to stuff that isn't strength or speed related. It's just like, who is more cunning, right? Yeah, Mysterio versus Scarecrow. Great matchup and concept. Can't wait to see it adapted. Coming in at number 13, we have Alphonse versus Nezuko, the younger siblings of Fullmetal Alchemist and Demon Slayer. This is a matchup that I've seen kicking up in popularity, which is good because I like this matchup and I think it has a lot of potential. The connections here are that they're both carrying siblings of the main character, and the plot basically revolves around them restoring their human body / humanity to normal by defeating the main villain, basically. Very simple connections, but also very strong, and I think that's why I like it. It's just a very simple, strong, and fun matchup, considering both of these characters have very unique abilities that normally wouldn't encounter each other in their own worlds. It'd be interesting to see how they interact with Alphonse's matter manipulation and Nezuko's blood demon arts and all of her crazy demon powers. As for who wins, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Alphonse wins. That one makes the most sense to me. I don't know how strong Nezuko gets by the end of her series. I haven't read the Demon Slayer manga. I've only seen up to season 2 of the anime. I did like it, and I do like Fullmetal Alchemist, and I would be very excited to see this episode announced because it comes from two series that, to my knowledge, or at least at the time of recording this, have only gotten one episode each, with Tanjiro versus Jonathan and Edward Elric versus Aang. One episode I did like, the other one not so much, but I think this episode has the potential to be very fun. I want clever use of Alphonse's alchemy. I want Nezuko's demon art to be conveyed very well, and I also want Nezuko to have a moment where she starts off very peaceful, kind of like how she did in season 1, and then as she gets more and more upset, she gets stronger and stronger, and she grows like what she did in season 2. I forgot how that stuff worked. It's been a while, but I want it to end with Nezuko kind of fully grown and fully engulfed in her demon rage, while Alphonse still has a clever head. I think that's probably one of the reasons why he wins. But anyway, I do want this episode to have a bit of a somber ending if Alphonse eventually wins. Maybe Alphonse kills her and then feels bad and then buries her or whatever. If she does lose, I want there to be a Jonathan Joestar scene at the very end, since that's what was implied at the end of Tanjiro versus Jonathan. I don't know how you'd really work that in. Maybe depending on who wins, you can have Jonathan walk in with Nezuko standing over the destroyed armor and just be like, oh, there you are, Nezuko. And if Alphonse wins, you can just have Alphonse walk away, and then Jonathan walks in on Nezuko's corpse, I guess. I do like this fight. It has a lot of potential. Could be very fun, involving two series I do like. Yeah, Alphonse versus Nezuko. So, earlier this year, I played Half-Life, and immediately after that, I played Half-Life 2. And they were both really good games, with Half-Life 2 rocketing itself up to one of my top 20s. And after that, being the Death Battle fan that I am, I tried to think of a good matchup for Gordon Freeman and one that I would like to see. Apparently one that's common knowledge is Gordon Freeman versus Isaac Clarke from Dead Space. Now, I don't know much about Dead Space, or really interested in it at all, but one that immediately came to mind for me was Gordon Freeman versus Doom Guy. Both are normal people whose lives were flipped upside down when an alien race from another dimension invaded, causing them to go into the alien dimension and stop it from the inside. Pretty solid and albeit a little bit surface level, and it only really covers the events of Half-Life 1, not really Half-Life 2, but I still think that this fight has potential for fun fighting and potentially funny banter. Actually, scratch that, both of these guys are silent protagonists, so there probably won't be any banter. But with Doom's plethora of weapons and Gordon Freeman's gravity gun and funny crowbar shenanigans, there could be some fun fights. Gordon Freeman could use the gravity gun to like shoot stuff at Doom, only for him to grab it and like rip it apart with his bare hands, because that's just kind of what he does. This fight does get me more excited than Isaac Clarke, and I would like to see this adapted. Maybe it would probably be an SFM fight or a Blender fight or one of those 3D fights. Unless they're able to make some really good Gordon Freeman and Doom sprites. I'm not really sure who wins this fight. I would probably bet on Doom, because he's lived through more, and I'm sure the demons that he fights are a lot stronger than whatever Gordon Freeman has fought. But I would still be rooting for Gordon, because, you know, Half-Life 2 is a good game. Also, if it was Doom that won, it would probably be a very violent killing, considering that's just the nature of his games. And yeah, not really much else. Except for, you know, make the episode good. Gordon Freeman versus Doom Guy. Darth Vader is two things. He's one of my favorite villains of all time, and also long overdue for a death battle episode. And in the time between him fighting Dr. Doom and now, several matchups have been created for him. One of them that I've seen a lot is Vader versus Saber from Fate, which doesn't make any sense to me, even coming from someone who's seen Fate. But my personal favorite is Darth Vader versus Obito from Naruto. The connections are they were both friends of the future mentor of the main character that would seemingly die after a big-scale battle, only to be saved by the main villain, aka Palpatine and Madara, and nursed back to health, reborn as a new person taking on the identity of someone else, and becoming the leading commander of the main villain's forces, aka the Empire and the Akatsuki. They have one last climactic battle with the main hero and then are shown kindness by them, learning the error of their ways and turning against the main villain in their final moments. Pretty solid connections, even though I feel like a lot of people would be turned off by this matchup because it shares similarities to Obi-Wan versus Kakashi. But I think since these characters fight so much more aggressively than Obi-Wan and Kakashi, that you could definitely make something work here. Darth Vader has a lot of unique and different abilities from Obi-Wan and other Force users, and his power is just a lot bigger in scale compared to everyone else. So you can definitely display that with him kind of doing what they did in Kenobi, where they're just throwing large, giant boulders at each other. And the world of Naruto just has so many different unique and fun jutsus that you could definitely make some interesting choreography off of that. One thing that might be a concern is like Darth Vader isn't very fast, and Obito is. So, I don't know, maybe you could probably make something work. But yeah, this matchup I think could be very fun. I think it's the best matchup thematically for both characters, because I care more about that more than I care about like who wins in fights. You could have the characters, you can have one character absolutely stomp, and I'll still like it if the themes and the connections are very solid, and the connections here are very solid. So I like this one a lot, and I like both characters, and I would love to see them, well, one make a return and one make a debut. Yeah, Darth Vader versus Obito. Dragon Ball, despite being one of my favorite animes, has entered the same territory as DC and Marvel in that they are constantly getting episodes, it feels like, to the point where it's kind of wearing me down. Don't get me wrong, I can only name one Dragon Ball episode off the top of my head that was below average. Unlike DC versus Marvel matchups, Dragon Ball episodes always tend to bang, and despite them using a significant amount of the main cast, there's still a lot of characters that I would like to see, and a lot of matchups that I would like to see involving Dragon Ball characters. And the biggest one for me is Vegito versus Dr. Fate. For those of you who don't know the connections, this might confuse or surprise you, but I promise you, this is probably one of the most thematically resonant Dragon Ball matchups that I've seen, and that's why I like it so much. The connections are, they are both fusions of two beings. One is an orphan who was taught how to fight by an old man, and the other is a prideful being who thinks humanity as a whole isn't worth saving. They fuse together using artifacts on their head, the earrings and the helmet, to create one powerful godlike fusion. This fight has the potential to have some of the highest scaling destruction and just power in any Dragon Ball episode, or just any Death Battle episode in general. The closest we've gotten is like Hulk versus Broly, Goku versus Superman, Beerus versus Galaxia, like stuff like that. But since these people reach godlike multiversal levels of power, there could be so much crazy shenanigans with Dr. Fate's magic and Vegito's key techniques, like with the final Kamehameha, the Spirit Sword. You can have a callback to like Candy Vegito. You can have Dr. Fate turn him into some inanimate object, and Vegito continues to fight and just beat him up. It'd be a fun joke, and it would also just be a fun callback. This fight should probably be higher, because the more I talk about this fight and the more I think about it, the more I want it. I might change it around. I probably won't, but just let it be known that this is a matchup that needs to happen and should happen. Thinking about how they'd adapt a fusion standalone character into Death Battle would be strange, but this, alongside Gogeta versus Omnimon, I feel like both will be very fun episodes. I didn't have Gogeta versus Omnimon on this list because I care for that episode a little bit less. Simply just because Vegito is my favorite of all the Dragon Ball fusions, and I think Dr. Fate is just really cool. But this fight will be, should be, can be fun, and I would probably get a very big reaction if I saw this on the next time. Yeah, Vegito versus Dr. Fate. On the topic of anime I really like, the next matchup on this list involves a character from a show I really like and a character from a show I don't so much like. I'm talking about Whitebeard versus Escanor. This matchup needs no introduction. It's gotten very popular recently. Both are large, burly mustache powerhouses with kind and gentle hearts. This is a fight that I like mainly because of the great sense of scale that can sell the overwhelming power of these two characters, since these two are basically regarded as the best of the best, the most powerful, the strongest, the best of their era, etc., etc. I don't really have a lot to say about this matchup in terms of what I want. Everything's basically been said better by other people. I would like Whitebeard's power and both of their powers to be displayed in a very climactic and strong, like overwhelmingly powerful way, and also have a death where, you know, the death is very climactic. Honestly, this episode could probably work for a season finale. But I would like the fight to end with one paying respect to the other, kind of similar to SpongeBob versus Aquaman or Storm versus Korra, stuff like that. I'm actually not really sure who wins this one. I've heard it can go either way. I'd be rooting for Whitebeard personally, because I like Whitebeard more. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. I just talk about the matchups I like. I don't really know much about who wins. I don't really go into research about that sort of stuff. But Whitebeard versus Escanor, yeah, good matchup. Moving on from that, we go from an episode that everyone knows and mostly everyone likes to an episode that I think maybe two other people have thought of, and that is Luigi versus Zenitsu from Demon Slayer. Now you guys might be wondering, what the heck is this matchup? Why is it here? Why not Luigi versus Pac-Man? Well, Luigi versus Pac-Man, to me, is very boring. The matchup is not bad in concept or in fight potential. It is just that the connections to me are very boring and very, probably the most surface level I've seen in a versus matchup. The connections are, they fight ghosts. That's it. You could pit Luigi or Pac-Man against the Ghostbusters and say, oh yeah, they fight ghosts. That's the connection. You know what I mean? It's just not, it doesn't interest me. It doesn't excite me. Also, just matchups that inherently can be solved in Super Smash Bros. It's strange. I can't talk. Mario vs. Sonic is one of my favorite episodes. I can't talk. But I think it just goes to show that this episode just isn't very exciting. For this episode matchup, the connections are a lot more in-depth and a lot more interesting. Both are cowards and sidekicks of the main character and usually act as comic relief. They both have electric-based powers and fight undead creatures and villains, and will eventually face their fears and beat whatever bad guy was terrorizing them in the first place. See, the connections there are much more solid and much more interesting and just make more sense than Luigi versus Pac-Man. And also, considering they have more interesting powers, with Luigi especially with all of his power-ups and just inherently different abilities from Mario, and Zenitsu's really pretty looking lightning breathing, you could have some interesting fight scenes. I would love to see Luigi fighting Zenitsu hammer to sword in the middle of like a dark, spooky forest when they were originally running from some scary monster. And then in the middle of their fight, the same scary monster shows back up and they have to run away while still fighting each other. And then shenanigans ensue from there. They land in like an open field and they have like a samurai-like duel. And Luigi pulls out his power-ups and Zenitsu does like whatever he does in the manga. I don't know what he does in the manga. I imagine he gets stronger. I would really like for them to keep the same really pretty visuals they had from Tanjiro versus Jonathan, and just have funny banter considering both of these characters are comic relief related. As for who wins, probably Luigi. Luigi scales to Mario and Bowser and all those guys. As far as I'm concerned, like, Demon Slayer has never really gotten to the level of like Mario's semi-Toon Force, like, light solar system level stuff. But, you know, I could be wrong. Maybe Zenitsu's a god in the manga. I haven't read the manga. I've only watched up to season 2 of the anime. But this fight does actually get me very excited to see adapted. And although it's pretty low, or I guess like mid-range on this list, it would probably get one of the bigger reactions out of me. Because, you know, if Luigi ever gets on Death Battle again, he's fighting Pac-Man. Like, there's no arguing that Pac-Man is the more popular matchup. It's, you know, more, I guess, mainstream, even though, as far as I'm concerned, no one really talks about Pac-Man anymore. If Zenitsu gets on Death Battle, he's probably fighting Kaminari from My Hero, which makes even less sense. But anyway, I think this matchup is really good. I think it has a lot of potential. Could be fun. Should be fun. Will be fun. Yeah. Luigi versus Zenitsu. With the massive success of Hercules vs. Sun Wukong this year, it's not hard to imagine that Death Battle would be down to do more mythological matchups in the future. The one that's on everyone's radar right now, from my understanding, is Zeus vs. Odin. And that matchup is all fine and dandy, and I wouldn't be upset at all if it got announced. But out of all of them, the one mythological matchup that I really want to see is Thor vs. Susanoo from Japanese mythology. The connections here are standard. Both are storm/thunder gods from famous mythologies. It's not the most groundbreaking connections in the world, but it's enough to justify this matchup, I feel. The real thing that sells me on this matchup is the animation potential. The idea of this taking place on an open sea during a raging thunderstorm sounds awesome. It has potential for a really high sense of scale, and to really sell the fact that this is two gods fighting for superiority. That wasn't really something Herc vs. Wukong really got across that well, but you can definitely do it here. It would also be a cool opportunity to try and mix Viking rock with classic Japanese music. You know, saying that out loud, that doesn't really sound like the best combination in the world, but, you know, the music potential is still there. Yeah, that's Thor vs. Susanoo. Coming in at number 6 is Bowser vs. Eggman. This is a matchup that needs no introduction. This is one of the most highly requested death battles ever, if I'm not mistaken, up there with Joker versus Giovanni and Whitebeard versus Escanor. I was pretty sure that it would be this season's finale, but then Deku versus Asta came out literally yesterday as I'm recording this, and I was proven wrong immediately. So that didn't turn out great. Even still, this matchup is a classic, and what I would really want from this matchup is a real emphasis on their armies, since that's a big thing with these characters, that they have massive armies that they use to invade their worlds and such. I want the Koopa army versus the Egg Fleet, and the battle to be a huge army battle between the two, and have the armies progressively shrink and be whittled down throughout the course of the fight until it's just Bowser and Eggman. And then you can have Fury Bowser versus the Death Egg Robot. I don't know how Fury Bowser works. I never played Bowser's Fury. And I don't know which one of Eggman's robots is the strongest. I just know I think the Death Egg Robot's a thing. I could be wrong. I haven't played a lot of Sonic games. One thing that could also be cool is that you can have Eggman fire a laser from the Death Egg, and then you can have Bowser have a beam struggle with the Death Egg. Or he can catch the laser and throw it back towards Eggman. That actually would be a cool killing move. Because I think Bowser wins this matchup. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm pretty sure he does. So you can have the death be Eggman pulls out the Death Egg and fires a laser down from space, and then Bowser catches the Death Egg laser and then directs it back at Eggman and kills him there. It would be a disintegration death, and I know how the community feels about disintegration deaths. I don't really care for them either. But it would be a cool disintegration death, and it would be a cool fake out for sure. This matchup has a lot of creativity in it, considering the franchises involved with their powers and their armies and such. And I really want to see this matchup. It's a really fun one. I like Bowser a lot. He's probably one of my favorite game villains ever. And yeah, it'd just be really fun. Bowser versus Eggman. I love Phineas and Ferb. It was one of my favorite shows to watch growing up, and even now, it's still my favorite cartoon ever. It's funny, it's smart, it's heartwarming, everything a good cartoon should be. So, imagine the look on my face when I learned that Perry the Platypus versus Skipper the goddamn Penguin was a matchup that existed. I immediately fell in love with it. This matchup, given the characters involved, has great banter potential considering the series' comedic natures. And also great potential for hand-to-hand combat, again, given the nature of these characters. You have a chance to see all of Agent P's gadgets, and that's all you really need for a matchup like this. Honestly, this one's only up here as high as it is because I love Phineas and Ferb, and the penguins are the best part of the Madagascar movies, don't at me. Also, the fact that Perry apparently wins this matchup makes it even better. I thought I'd have more to say on this matchup. I guess it's beautiful in its simplicity. Perry versus Skipper. Yeah, make it happen. Undertale is one of my favorite games ever. And truthfully, getting any character from that game in a death battle would be amazing. But the one we're probably getting first is Sans, to no one's surprise. Now, realistically, if Sans ever gets into death battle, he would most likely fight Judge, which is a fine matchup. Even though I know nothing about Judge, I would still be excited, because, you know, it's Sans. I like Sans. However, the matchup for Sans that I want the most is Sans versus Koro-sensei from Assassination Classroom. The connections are simple, yet solid and thematic. Both are smiley, wisecracking comedic characters that both made a promise to a woman that they befriended to protect a kid/group of kids, and only go back on that promise when that kid uses violence against the undeserving. They both have an underlying serious side as well that usually never shows itself. Solid connections all around. But what really sells this matchup for me is not only the animation potential, but also the banter. These two characters usually act as comic relief, so the potential for witty banter is endless. They can throw puns back and forth, and Sans can break the fourth wall, etc. I haven't really thought too much about what the banter would be like. In terms of the actual fight, I want their fighting styles to be conveyed very well, since they're basically contrasts. Koro relies on overwhelming his opponents with his speed and using it to retreat while any wounds recover, while Sans normally prefers to overwhelm his opponents as quickly as possible with an overwhelming barrage of attacks. Also, considering how emotional the deaths of these two are, I would expect their death to be emotional here as well, regardless of who loses. There's not really much more I can say about this fight without treading over things that Biffweed said in his video talking about this matchup, so if you want more details about someone that's a lot better about talking about this stuff than me, I recommend looking at his video when he makes a dream season with a bunch of his friends. In short though, I really love this matchup. I love Sans, I like Assassination Classroom. This would be probably Sans' best matchup, and I prefer this over Koro-sensei versus Monokuma as well. So, Sans versus Koro-sensei, make it happen. This next one involves a character that was important to me growing up, and that's Percy Jackson. I loved those books growing up, and I still like revisiting them every now and then. And like Agent P, seeing him in death battle would mean a lot to me personally. Truthfully, regardless of who he would fight, I'd be happy. But I think the best pick for him thematically would be Aqualad from DC Comics. Both were kids who started out as the son/apprentice of a powerful and famous Sea King and have hydrokinesis. They both grew up and became heroes of their own and joined a group of other superpowered kids like him. Granted, this mainly works for Young Justice Aqualad. I don't know anything about his comic counterpart, or if that story is still accurate to the comics. But it's better connections than Percy versus Zagreus, who was my previous selection for a Percy matchup, which, upon looking back at it, didn't make a lot of sense. This is the best matchup for Percy, in my opinion, and he also apparently wins, which is also pretty cool. This is a matchup that needs to take place underwater. Given the amazing underwater visuals of SpongeBob vs. Aquaman, they could definitely do something like that again for these two. All I can really ask for this fight is good swordplay, good uses of their water powers, and also implement some of Percy's other powers, like his ability to create earthquakes and control poison, maybe. Maybe even implement blackjack somehow. There's a lot you can do with this fight to make it interesting and fun. There's also potential for good banter as well, since Percy's whole thing is that he's a sarcastic and witty, almost Spider-Man-like quips, and you can have that personality contrast pretty hard with Aqualad's usually stoic and serious tone, and maybe have him, once he gets the upper hand on Percy, he drops like a quip back at him, and then Percy gets upset. Like I said, a lot you can do in terms of fighting and banter, and a lot of it. I just like this matchup. Truthfully, Percy just getting in Death Battle at all would be a dream come true regardless of who he fights, but in terms of which one I would like in particular, this would be the one. My number 2 pick is Soldier 76 versus Mr. Incredible. This is another matchup I learned thanks to Biffweed, and has also become one of my favorites, so thanks for that, man. This one I love solely because of the connections, because they compare and contrast in such great and interesting ways that just the thought of seeing these two fighting and talking about their worldviews would be such a great thing to see on Death Battle. Both were heroes in their glory days, but turned to vigilante work after their organizations fell due to incidents that they were involved in. They both tried to continue their hero work in completely opposite ways, with Mr. Incredible becoming a police radio respondent trying to relive his glory days, while Soldier became a vigilante and started beating the crap out of whatever crooks he came across, resenting the hero he used to be despite still being good at heart. Soldier 76 is my favorite character in Overwatch, and The Incredibles is just a great movie, and seeing these two fight in a thematically rich death battle would be great. There's not really much else I could ask for in this fight, outside of them discussing the worldviews during the fight, good hand-to-hand combat, good conveyances of Mr. Incredible's strength, and clever uses of Soldier's gun and rockets and healing packs and other stuff that he has. Not so sure who wins. I've heard either or. I'd be rooting for Soldier 76, but I think the strength gap between the two is just too wide for him to win. But I don't know. We'll just have to see. And here we are at number 1. My most wanted Death Battle episode is Super Mario vs. Mickey Mouse. Kind of coming out of nowhere, but this is a matchup that, besides maybe Percy vs. Aqualad, would get the biggest reaction out of me if it got announced. This is Mario's and Mickey's best matchup besides Sonic and Bugs Bunny respectively. And this isn't to say that I don't want Bugs vs. Mickey. I would also be very excited if that matchup got announced too, since Bugs, like Mario, is a character that I grew up with and adore to this day. But I think this matchup takes the spot of my number 1 simply because I like the animation and fight potential of this one a little bit more. Considering all the different power-ups Mario has, as well as all the Toon Force stuff Mickey has, as well as all the Kingdom Hearts stuff if you're including that, there's a lot of different stuff you can have these two throw back and forth at each other. Mickey can use Ultima, and the dust can clear slowly, and it's revealed that Mario used a Starman at the last moment. Mario can create a Cherry clone army for Mickey to fight. There's so much you can do with this fight. I saw a comment a while back on Brandon Yates' commission track for this matchup that gave the idea of the fight taking place in an amusement park, with Mario and Mickey trying to promote their respective parks. And that opens up a whole slew of interesting set pieces. Mario and Mickey can fight Hammer to Keyblade while on a roller coaster. Mario can use a Mega Mushroom to pick up a drop tower ride and use it like a bat against Mickey. They can fist fight on top of a Ferris wheel. They can throw bumper cars back and forth at each other. There's so much. I get excited of this fight just thinking about it. I'd definitely be rooting for Mario throughout the whole thing, and I'm pretty sure he wins too, which is awesome. Mario is among my favorite characters ever, and Well, he's already been on Death Battle, and if he ever does come back, he's probably going to be fighting Kirby, which is fine. Seeing him in something like this, with this much animation potential and just a sense of scale and finality, I guess, you could use this for a season finale, potentially. That would just be great. This is my most wanted Death Battle episode, and all I can really hope for is that Death Battle takes this matchup in general under consideration and makes it a reality someday, and that's all I can really ask for. Well, that's my list. Hopefully you enjoyed, and hopefully I was able to introduce you to matchups you never heard of or wouldn't have even considered before, because in my mind, that's the glory of the Versus community, learning about matchups you never even considered before and realizing, wow, that makes so much sense. I have a lot more planned for this channel down the line, including a ranking of Season 9 once that wraps up, more trailers, more Death Battle lists, and other stuff. Ranking Season 9 will be my next big project, so stay tuned for that, because that is going to take a while. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one, whenever that may be.